let's talk right now about something which we should not ever have to talk about because it's so ridiculous and silly and absurd, and yet it's constantly in the news. We didn't start the culture wars. We're just the victims of them. That's particularly the case if you are what's called, well, cervix owner. No, a woman. You remember those people, half of the population. But we are seeing our sport, a lot of our existence really wiped out. The latest stories about, trans cyclists, trans swimmers like Leah Thomas, and the latest example of a trans woman entering women's sport, a 6-foot trans woman by the name of Blair Hamilton, who's being allowed to play football for the England University's female side as their goalkeeper, despite being biologically, well, still a man, born male, identifying as female, and being, taking the place of a woman in the team. Let's talk about this with Helen Joyce. She is the author of Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, and she's also Director of Advocacy at the campaigning group Sex Matters. Good morning to you, Helen.
Hi, Julia. So nice to see you again.
Lovely to talk to you. I'm absolutely blown away by how many of these stories are emerging, because an awful lot of people who were saying, oh, stop going on about this stuff. It doesn't matter. There's a tiny number of trans people. They're not impacting on women's lives. You're just making this stuff and stirring up culture wars. We had Laurel Hubbard in the women's weightlifting in the Olympics. And we had Leah Thomas, the swimming. We've had a cyclist over the weekend who was going to compete in women's cycling. And now we've got a 6-foot transgender goalie being selected for the England University women's side. This is not just a few people, is it?
But even if it was, Julia, when they tried to decide whether it was fair to allow runners to run on blades, they didn't say, oh, come on, nobody's going to chop their legs off on purpose. Of course they aren't. The question is whether they have an unfair advantage. That's all. So male people in female sports have an unfair advantage, even if it's only one. I think we should stop saying trans. Do you know that? I think we should start saying male. We should say male goalie selected for female team, because that's the problem. This person is male. And that would make clear what the issue was and what the problem is and why we're not just anti-trans or something like that. We're pro-women.
And there's a difference, isn't there? He's saying, look, I'm really happy for if Blair Hamilton wants to live life and identify as a woman and call himself by a woman's name, and that's absolutely fine. That's fine. However, there is going to have to be a limit on what we call trans rights, where they interfere with other or trample on women's rights. Because when a 6-foot biological male who has gone through male puberty and is a man, if you look at somebody, they look like a man or a woman. We know what a man or a woman look like and sound like. We're not idiots. We're human beings. We've been trained from birth to recognise these things. If at that point, that's not to disrespect this person or anyone else who is trans. It's just about the reality. When someone is a biological male and they're competing against or with women, they have a physical advantage that most of us would call, let's be honest, cheating.
Yeah, they say it's not cheating because it's the rules. So I wouldn't focus on the individual, I'd focus on the rules. The whole entire purpose of women's sport is to allow exceptional women to shine rather than be defeated by relatively mediocre men. So the fact is that being a man gives you 10 to 50% advantage just by virtue of having gone through male puberty over what you would have been if you hadn't gone through male puberty. So whatever a man in women's sports is, he's got a 10 to 50% leg up over the women.
And we saw that with Leah Thomas, who was, 412th or something in men's US college swimming. And when he became identified as a woman, and I'm using he advisedly, he's still intact, he's still, a heterosexual biological male, he suddenly became the best so-called female swimmer.
That's right. And I wouldn't care if he had undergone genital surgery, and I don't care whether he's heterosexual either. I simply care that this person is male. They should not be in female competition. And, Emily Bridges, who's the cyclist that we've seen most recently here, Emily was competing on the men's team with great success and totally accepted by Emily's male teammates. That's what I mean by trans acceptance.
Yes.
That a man can identify how he likes, that he can dress how he likes, he can do his hair how he likes, and his male teammates budge up. Don't be bigots. make space for this unusual, gender non-conforming male, cheer him when he does well and so on. Why are women the ones who have to budge up and make space for males?
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because we don't see trans men, i.e. biological women, imposing on men's sport.
They're in the women's teams. Yes. Julia, they're in the women's teams.
Exactly. Well, we know why. It's because they wouldn't have a chance because of the biological, physical superiority of men. Again, this is the thing. What about the people who say, why don't we just simply have trans teams where, trans Olympics, trans cycling, trans swimming races? And of course, those would always be won by trans women rather than trans men. But at least it wouldn't be imposing on women.
I just think that what's the issue here? I mean, sport is about bodies. It's not about identities. It doesn't matter how you identify. So there's males and females. There's male sports and female sports. We knew how we did it. The very first male person who said, I identify as a woman, I want to be on the women's team, should have been told, oh, don't be ridiculous. You're male. That's the team for you.
Why are these sporting bodies giving into this? We're often told, again, there was the point where you had to have had surgery. Then the rules were changed for the Olympics where you didn't have to have had surgery or full treatment. You could just, self-identify, but you had to take your testosterone levels down. Again, still way higher than a woman could ever possibly have. Even if she was treating herself with steroids every day and cheating, she wouldn't be able to reach those testosterone levels naturally. But then it's moved to just, if I wake up on a Monday morning and say that I am the opposite sex that I am, then I can compete in that sport, and that's the end of the matter. Who was putting the pressure? Who was arguing to these sports bodies that is what was the right thing to do?
I mean, in some individual athletes and some campaigners who were looking for a new cause after gay marriage was won. But you have to remember as well that the sporting authorities really don't care about women's sports. They really, really don't. They don't care who the women run around with. They don't even see us as real. I mean, I have a sister and a brother who are both professional cricket players, and the difference in terms of how they're paid, how they're trained, whether they get economy or business class flights, who sponsors their kits, everything, absolutely night and day. They don't care about female athletes. And you see this in the way that they've been gagged. So people keep saying, why don't the women talk up? Well, that's because if they talk up, they'll lose all their sponsorship, they'll be kicked off the team, they'll be called bigots, they'll be hounded on social media, they will end their careers. Why don't the men speak up? That's what I want to know.
I've always thought that. Well, I mean, the answer is we did see with Emily Bridges, the cyclist, actually. The women said, look, we're not going to compete. I mean, lots of people were saying, why did the women on the US college teams not, why did they not say, I won't compete against the
They wouldn't even get into university. They were told they would never get a job.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very much up to people who are not going to be personally affected by this to speak up, to provide that cover. But the answer really is for women athletes to just say en masse, we will not compete against male-bodied athletes. We're not bigots. We're not transphobic. Really happy to welcome these people into our lives in every other way. But when a man competes against women in a women-only sport, what he is a cheat.
It's like being, an adult and competing as an under 15, or being a heavyweight boxer and competing in the flyweight category. Yeah. You're just category defeating. You're not in the right place. Emily Bridges is actually an excellent cyclist and was doing extremely well on the Welsh team. Yeah. There's no need to do this. It's not right. I really, really cannot emphasise enough. I think it's the male athletes who need to speak up here.
Hear, hear. Well, we should be encouraging that. Helen, Joyce, you've been a fantastic advocate on all of this, and your book is superb. If you really want to understand why, what is going on, do read her book, Trans When Ideology Meets Reality, and fantastic organisation Sex Matters. She's Director of Advocacy. Thank you, Helen, for joining us.